The New York City evening didn't just arrive, it seeped into the bones. It was a damp, clinging cold that smelled of wet pavement, exhaust fumes, and for Anna, the specific, soul-crushing aroma of her life. Burnt coffee from the pot she'd forgotten to turn off, the greasy tang of frying onions that clung to her hair, and the overarching scent of bleach and weary resignation. Her 12-hour shift at the Daily Grind, a relic of a diner in a forgotten corner of Queens, was finally, mercifully, over. 12 hours of her feet screaming in protest inside cheap, non-slip sneakers. 12 hours of refilling coffee for patrons who looked through her, their eyes glazing over as if she were a piece of the worn Formica furniture. 12 hours of fighting the desperate, childish urge to lock herself in the narrow staff bathroom and just weep. Today had been a masterclass in misery. The morning had begun with a text message from her landlord, Mrs. Gable, a woman who communicated exclusively in angry all-caps threats. "Rent due tomorrow, Anna. I'm not running a charity. Last warning." The words had burned a hole in her screen. The money she had so carefully, so painfully hoarded, $1 at a time from meager tips, money saved by eating ramen for 6 straight days, had vanished in a single wire transfer yesterday. It was already in Ohio, a futile attempt to plug a leak in the dam of her mother's cascading medical bills. Now, her worn-out wallet, a flimsy thing she'd had since high school, held a pathetic treasure. One crumpled $5 bill, a few equally exhausted-looking singles, and a smattering of coins that wouldn't even be enough for a load of laundry. It was subway fare and a meager dinner, maybe. "Just get through tonight," Anna breathed, her own warm breath turning to a ghostly plume in the frigid air as she gave the last table a final, defeated wipe. Just one more day in this endless, lightless tunnel. The irony was crushing. She'd come to New York with a scholarship offer from NYU clutched in her hand like a golden ticket, her head full of poetry and the promise of a life written in brighter ink. Now, at 24, the woman in the grimy window's reflection looked a decade older, her eyes hollowed out by a fatigue that had nothing to do with lack of sleep and everything to do with a lack of hope. Her uniform, a drab brown apron over a blouse that was one wash away from disintegrating, felt like a costume for a role she never wanted, the girl who failed. The last customer, a man in a suit that cost more than her month's rent, had made a show of leaving a single rumpled dollar bill on the table, a gesture of such performative largesse that it felt more like an insult than a tip. Anna had swallowed her pride and pocketed it. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. She shed the apron like a snakeskin, pulling on her threadbare jeans and a jacket that offered more psychological comfort than actual warmth. The moment she pushed open the diner door, the November wind attacked, a vicious personal assault. The long journey home stretched before her like a penance. A suffocating ride on the R train, where she'd have to stand pressed against strangers, followed by a mad dash for the Q60 bus, a phantom that only appeared once an hour. The image of her lumpy mattress in her tiny, attic-like room was her only solace. She had no way of knowing that destiny wasn't waiting for her at home. It was lurking just a few miles away, in the bright, chaotic heart of the city, ready to present her with an examination for which she could never have prepared. Union Square at rush hour was a controlled implosion of humanity. It was a churning vortex of hurried footsteps, the polyglot chatter of a dozen languages, the distant wail of a siren, and the rhythmic thump of a bucket drummer laying down a beat for the indifferent masses. Anna, a small weary ship in this turbulent sea, navigated the currents, her mind a frantic abacus calculating subway times and bus departures. Missing her connection meant a 40-minute walk through poorly lit streets, a prospect that made the hairs on her arms stand up. And then she heard it, a sound that pierced the urban symphony like a needle. It was a child's cry, thin, piercing, and utterly desolate. At first, her city dweller's instinct for self-preservation kicked in. Don't look, don't get involved, someone else will handle it. New York was full of noises, full of small, fleeting dramas, but this sound didn't fade. It persisted, a thread of pure misery weaving through the noise, pulling at something deep inside her. Anna stopped, her tired feet aching in protest, and forced her eyes to scan the swirling crowd. And then she saw him. He was standing near the base of the imposing equestrian statue of George Washington, a tiny, solitary figure in the vast, impersonal space. He was a splash of vivid color in a world of grays and blacks. He wore a bright red Montclair puffer coat, the kind she'd seen on celebrity children in tabloids, a ridiculous luxury that was completely at odds with his desperate situation. A goofy hand-knitted hat with a floppy pom-pom was askew on his head, and his little leather boots were pristine, as if they'd never touched a dirty city street until this very moment. He was hugging himself tightly, his small shoulders heaving with ragged sobs. The carefully constructed walls around Anna's heart crumbled. Her own problems, the rent, the hunger, the cold, evaporated in the face of his raw terror. Still, the voice of survival whispered its poison. Keep walking. You're one person. What can you do? You'll miss your bus. You'll be walking home in the dark. It's not your problem. She even took a definitive step towards the subway entrance, the downward pull of the stairs a promise of escape. But she couldn't. The image of him, a little red lighthouse of loneliness, was impossible to ignore. She imagined the sheer, primal terror of being that small, that alone, in a place this big. With a sharp exhale, she turned around. Damn it all, she whispered to herself, a flicker of her old pre-New York defiance sparking to life. I'm not that person. I can't be. She approached him slowly, gently, as if he were a fawn she might startle into traffic. She knelt on the cold, damp concrete, the chill instantly seeping through the thin fabric of her jeans, bringing herself down to his level. Hey there, little guy, she said, her voice a soft murmur. It's okay. My name is Anna. Are you lost? Where's your mommy? At the sound of her voice, the boy flinched, and a fresh wave of tears washed down his face. His grief was so profound it was almost silent, just a choked gasp. Mommy! I want my mommy. People streamed past them, their faces a blur. A couple glanced over, a flicker of concern in their eyes, before they were swept away by the crowd. The city's notorious bubble of determined non-involvement was holding strong. It was in that moment, kneeling on the grimy pavement, that Anna understood. There was no someone else. There was only her. Shh, I know you do, sweetie. I know, and we are going to find her. I promise you that, Anna said, her voice a low, soothing mantra. She was projecting a confidence that was a complete fabrication. Inside, a cold dread was spreading through her veins. This was a heavy, terrifying responsibility. Can you tell me your name? The boy, calmed slightly by her persistent gentleness, managed a shaky whisper between sobs. Mikey. Mikey. That's a wonderful name. Well, Mikey, here's the plan. You and I are going to go on a little adventure. We're going to go somewhere warm, and I'm going to buy you the most delicious, most chocolatey hot chocolate you have ever had. Would you like that? She saw his chapped lips, the raw red of his cheeks. He was frozen. An idea, both brilliant and financially catastrophic, bloomed in her mind. Across the square, the glowing, whimsical sign of Serendipity Sweets was a beacon of warmth and sugar. It was a tourist trap, a place where a single dessert cost what she made in 2 hours. But none of that mattered now. Getting him out of the biting wind and into a place of safety was the only mission. She gently took his small, gloved hand. It was as cold as a stone. Come on, Mikey. It's right there. We'll be warm in just a minute. Stepping inside the cafe was like entering another dimension. The air was warm and heavy with the scent of sugar, vanilla, and high-quality chocolate. It was the smell of comfort, of indulgence, of a life completely alien to her. Anna guided Mikey to a plush, velvet armchair that practically swallowed him whole and helped him out of his damp coat. She approached the counter, trying to look like she belonged there, her eyes scanning the handwritten menu on the large chalkboard. The prices made her stomach clench. Emperor's Deluxe Hot Chocolate with homemade marshmallows and a cloud of whipped cream was $9. A single cupcake was $6. She fumbled with the clasp of her wallet and stared at the pathetic collection of bills inside. A 5, 4 ones, a scattering of quarters and dimes, $9.72. It was, quite literally, everything she had in the world. It was tomorrow's subway fare. It was tonight's dinner and tomorrow's breakfast. For a dizzying, shameful second, she almost turned around. The gnawing ache in her own stomach was a powerful, persuasive voice. But then she looked over at Mikey, who had stopped crying and was now watching her with an expression of such fragile, desperate hope in his enormous brown eyes. The debate was over. Her hunger could wait. Her 40-minute walk home was just a walk. This little boy's terror was real and immediate. She turned back to the counter, smoothing the crumpled bills on the polished marble. She pushed the entire pathetic pile toward the immaculately dressed barista. "Just one of the Emperor's deluxe hot chocolates, please." The barista scooped up the money without comment. A few minutes later, an enormous, steaming mug, a work of art topped with a swirl of cream and a rainbow of tiny marshmallows, was placed before Mikey. A watery, wobbly smile finally broke through his fear. As she watched him wrap his hands around the warm mug and take a careful chocolatey sip, Anna felt a profound warmth spread through her own chest, a feeling richer and more nourishing than any food. Her wallet was a hollow, empty shell, but her heart, for the first time in a long time, felt full. The hot chocolate was a miracle elixir. With each sip, Mikey seemed to inflate, his small, hunched shoulders straightening, the terrified look in his eyes softening to one of simple exhaustion. He meticulously fished out every single marshmallow with his spoon before drinking the rest, leaving a perfect chocolate mustache above his upper lip. Anna, watching him, felt a flicker of a smile touch her own face. Once he was finished, she tried again, gently probing for information that could lead her to his family. "Mikey, do you know your last name? Like Mikey Smith or Mikey Jones?" He just shook his head, his eyes wide. "Do you know what street you live on?" Another shake. "Do you know Mommy's phone number?" He thought for a moment, then proudly recited a random-sounding string of 7 numbers, which Anna dutifully typed into her phone, knowing it was almost certainly a jumble he'd made up. The call, predictably, went to a disconnected line. The clock on the wall ticked on, each click an accusation. An hour had passed, then 90 minutes. The cafe, once a haven, was beginning to feel like a fishbowl. The staff's earlier kindness had evaporated, replaced by pointed glares and ostentatious wiping of nearby empty tables. They were a business, and Anna was now just a loiterer with a child. She knew they had to leave. This passive waiting wasn't working. Mikey's mother, this mysterious Mommy Liz, must be descending into a very dark and terrifying place. It was time to escalate. With a heavy sigh, Anna helped Mikey back into his still damp coat. The moment they stepped back out into the night, the cold was a shock, more biting and aggressive than before. The city seemed to have grown darker, the shadows longer. Her last bus was a distant memory. "Fresh air is good for you," she told herself, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. She spotted a bench under the yellow glow of a street lamp that seemed slightly less grimy than the others. She sat Mikey down, then unwound the thin, cheap scarf from her own neck and wrapped it twice around his, tucking the ends into his coat. He leaned against her immediately, a gesture of complete and total trust that made her heart ache. She pulled out her battered smartphone, the battery icon glowing a malevolent final red. She took a deep breath and dialed 911. Her voice, when she spoke, was surprisingly calm, a stark contrast to the frantic chaos in her mind. "Hello, yes. I need to report a found child. His name is Mikey. He's about 5 years old. We're at Union Square on the south side, right by the Serendipity Suites Cafe. He doesn't know his last name or any contact information." The dispatcher's voice was professional, bored, and followed a script. Name, location, description. He promised to send a patrol car but gave no estimate of their arrival time. "An officer will be there when one becomes available." After she hung up, the silence felt immense. The city roared around them, but their small bench felt like a deserted island. She was it. She was the entire rescue party. Pulling Mikey closer, she wrapped her arm around him, trying to shield him from the wind with her own body. The little boy, overwhelmed by the fear, the sugar, and the warmth of a kind stranger, rested his head on her shoulder. His breathing soon deepened into the steady, rhythmic cadence of sleep. The weight of him, both physical and metaphorical, was immense. Anna stared at the endless stream of headlights, at the glittering, indifferent skyscrapers, and felt the chasm between her life and his more acutely than ever. She was a ghost in this city, and he was its prince, and she was stuck in the cold, dark space between. What felt like an eternity later, but was probably only 30 minutes, a sound cut through the city's drone. It was the whisper-quiet crunch of expensive tires on asphalt. A gleaming obsidian black Audi A8L, a car that looked more like a stealth bomber than a vehicle, pulled up to the curb with an impossible smoothness. Before it had even come to a complete stop, the passenger side door was thrown open. A woman emerged, not stepping out, but launching herself from the car with a desperate athletic grace. She was a vision of power and wealth. Tall, slender, wrapped in a cream-colored Loro Piana cashmere coat that Anna knew, from a forgotten glimpse in a fashion magazine, cost more than she earned in 6 months. Her golden blonde hair was pulled back into a chignon so perfect it looked like a sculpture. Her face, a collection of sharp, aristocratic angles and a determined jaw, was the kind of face that commanded boardrooms and terrified competitors. But in this moment, every ounce of her legendary composure had been stripped away. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. Her piercing blue eyes, which could dissect a hostile takeover proposal with a single glance, were wide and frantic. They darted wildly across the square, scanning, searching, before they finally locked onto the small, bright red anomaly on the bench. Mikey! The name was ripped from her, a raw, ragged sound that was part prayer, part scream. She ran, not walked, but ran, across the pavement, her stiletto heels, which cost more than Anna's rent, clicking a frantic staccato on the concrete. She didn't slow as she reached them, but dropped to her knees on the grimy ground, heedless of her coat, her status, her everything. "Oh, Mikey, my sweet boy, thank God," she sobbed, her voice cracking as she pulled her son into a fierce, desperate embrace. Mikey, waking with a start, dissolved into relieved tears, burying his face in his mother's impossibly soft coat. The woman held him for a long moment, rocking him gently, murmuring reassurances. Only when she was certain he was real, whole, and unharmed did she finally lift her head and turn her gaze on Anna. It was a look of staggering intensity. It was like being scanned by a high-powered machine, one that was assessing, analyzing, and calculating all at once. Anna felt herself shrink under the weight of it. "You," the woman said, her voice still thick with emotion but already regaining a sliver of its innate steely authority. "You're the one who found him? You've been with him this whole time." Frozen, intimidated, and suddenly acutely aware of her threadbare clothes and chapped hands, Anna could only manage a small, shaky nod. "I found him. He was so scared," she managed to stammer. "I called 911. We were just waiting." The woman's hand, never straying far from her son, moved with practiced efficiency to her purse. She produced a smartphone that looked like a thin black mirror, tapped the screen once, and spoke with clipped precision. "It's Vance. He's with me. He's safe. Call off the search." She ended the call and her full, undivided attention snapped back to Anna. The raw panic in her eyes was being rapidly replaced by something far more formidable, a deep, calculating, and now profoundly grateful intelligence. The woman was Elizabeth Vance. The name hung in the air, though Anna didn't catch it. To Anna, she was just Mikey's mom. To the rest of the world, she was a titan, the founder and CEO of Vance Capital, a private equity behemoth that devoured companies for breakfast. The press had dubbed her the she-wolf of Wall Street for her famously icy and ruthless tactics. But kneeling on the cold ground, clutching her son, she was none of those things. She was a mother who had just been pulled back from the brink of a parent's darkest abyss. "I can never thank you enough," Elizabeth said, her voice now regaining its customary polish as she rose to her feet with a liquid grace. "You have no idea. The things that were going through my head." She didn't finish the sentence. Instead, she opened her impossibly expensive alligator handbag, a Hermes Birkin, Anna would later realize, and withdrew a thick stack of $100 bills, bound by a gleaming gold money clip. The wad was thick enough to choke a horse. It was more money than Anna had ever held in her life. It was a solution. It was freedom. "Here," Elizabeth said, her voice firm, as she held the money out. "It wasn't a request. It was a command. Please, you must take this. For your time, for your kindness, for everything." The scent of money, crisp and new, wafted towards Anna. For one heart-stopping, shameful second, she wanted it. Oh, how she wanted it. She could see the bills in her hand, could feel the weight of them. She could picture Mrs. Gable's stunned face, her mother's relieved voice on the phone. It was right there. A simple transaction. But then, something else, something deeper and more stubborn, rose up inside her. It was a flickering ember of the pride she thought had been extinguished long ago. She took a step back, shaking her head, her hands held up as if to ward off a blow. "No," she said, her voice coming out stronger than she expected. "No, thank you. I couldn't possibly. I did what anyone would have done." Elizabeth Vance stopped dead, her arm outstretched. A flicker of genuine, unfeigned astonishment crossed her features. This was a scenario for which she had no protocol. In her universe, gratitude was transactional. Kindness had a price. Generosity was an investment. To be met with an unconditional refusal, especially from someone who so clearly needed the money, was a profound anomaly. It was illogical, and it was, to her surprise, deeply impressive. She looked at Anna, at her tired eyes, her shabby coat, her chapped hands, and saw not poverty but a wealth of a different kind. Integrity. "I see," Elizabeth said slowly, her brilliant mind recalibrating. She lowered her hand and slid the money back into her purse with a decisive click of the clasp. "I respect that." She paused, her gaze turning analytical. This girl was not a problem to be solved with cash. She was an asset to be understood. Then, she reached into a different section of her purse and produced a business card. It was black, made of a heavy, textured stock that felt like fine linen, the gold lettering of her name and title indented with precision. "Then take this," she insisted, her tone leaving no room for argument. "My personal cell. I want you to call me tomorrow. Not a request, a demand. I have a debt to you, and believe me, Miss—" "Anna," Anna whispered. "Anna, I always pay my debts." She pressed the card into Anna's ice-cold palm. The card felt impossibly warm, heavy with unspoken promise. With a final sharp nod that conveyed more than a torrent of words, Elizabeth scooped up Mikey, turned, and folded herself into the silent, waiting Audi. The car pulled away, melting into the city traffic, leaving Anna alone on the bench, shivering in the cold, clutching a small black rectangle that felt like it might just burn a hole through her hand. The walk home was a 40-minute fugue state. Anna's feet moved on autopilot, her numb legs carrying her through the familiar, gritty streets of her neighborhood. She didn't feel the cold. She didn't feel the ache in her back. Her entire consciousness was focused on the impossible weight and texture of the business card in her pocket. In her tiny, cell-like room, she didn't even bother to turn on the main light. She sat on the edge of her lumpy bed in the dark and stared at the card under the faint glow of a street lamp outside her window. Elizabeth Vance, CEO, Vance Capital. It sounded like a title from a different planet. With reverent care, she placed it on her cluttered nightstand, a stark black rectangle amidst a sea of old paperbacks and unpaid bills. Sleep was a foreign country she couldn't seem to reach. The next morning she was jolted awake, not by the shrill beep of her alarm, but by a violent, percussive knocking on her door. It was Mrs. Gable, her voice a nasal whine that could curdle milk. "Anna, it's past 10. Rent was due yesterday. I want the money, or I want you and your junk out on the curb by noon. I'm not playing games." The familiar litany of threats washed over Anna, but today they landed differently. The usual wave of panic and shame was there, but beneath it was something new, something sharp and hard that had been forged on a cold bench the night before. She was at the absolute bottom. There was nowhere to go but up. Or at least, nowhere to fall further. She stood up, took the card from the nightstand, and with a deep, shuddering breath, decided to make the leap. Her fingers were clumsy and stiff as she dialed the number on her phone's cracked screen. The phone felt slippery in her sweaty palm. Her heart was a wild bird beating against her ribs. She was fully prepared for a secretary to laugh at her, for the number to be disconnected, for this to be the final cruel joke in a long series of them. The line clicked. A voice, smooth as silk and cold as ice, answered. "Elizabeth Vance's office. How may I assist you?" Anna's throat was dry. Hello," she stammered, hating how small and timid she sounded. "My name is Anna, Miss Vance. She gave me this number yesterday. It was about her son, Mikey." There was a pregnant pause filled with what Anna was certain was disdain. "Please hold," the voice said, dripping with skepticism. Anna held her breath, waiting for the inevitable dismissal. But then, the line clicked again, and a different voice filled her ear. It was Elizabeth Vance, and the voice was pure, undiluted authority. "Anna, good morning. I've been expecting you." Anna felt a jolt, as if the floor had dropped out from under her. "I have a car waiting for you downstairs in 20 minutes. It will bring you to my office. One World Trade Center, 85th floor. I'll see you at 3 o'clock sharp." It wasn't a question or an invitation. It was a summons. Anna, completely overwhelmed, could only whisper a single word. "Okay. Excellent," Elizabeth said, and the line went dead. Anna sat on her bed, the phone still pressed to her ear, in a state of stunned disbelief. A moment later, Mrs. Gable, who had clearly been plastered to the door, burst in without knocking. "A car? One World Trade? Are you having a breakdown? Who do you think you're fooling? You pathetic little—" But her words trailed off as she followed Anna's gaze out the window. Down on the street, impossibly, a black Audi, identical to the one from last night, had just pulled up to the curb. For the first time in 2 years, Anna looked at her landlord not with fear, but with a strange dawning pity. The journey downtown was a silent, dreamlike glide through a city that looked completely different from the backseat of an Audi. At 2:45 p.m., Anna stood in the cavernous, sun-drenched lobby of One World Trade Center. It was less a building lobby and more a temple to commerce and power, all white marble and soaring glass. The air itself seemed to hum with a different frequency, a low thrum of ambition and unimaginable wealth. Anna felt like an imposter, a sparrow that had accidentally flown into an eagle's nest. She had worn her only dress, a plain black sheath she'd found for $5 at a thrift store, and had spent an hour trying to make her worn-out flats look presentable. She clutched her purse to her chest like a shield. Steeling herself, she approached the massive security desk. "I have a 3 o'clock appointment with Elizabeth Vance," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The guard didn't even blink. He tapped his keyboard, printed out a visitor's pass with her photo on it, and pointed her towards a sleek, private bank of elevators. "85th floor, ma'am." The elevator ride was a silent, breathtaking launch into the sky. When the doors opened, it was to a scene of such stark, minimalist luxury that it stole Anna's breath. The entire floor was Vance Capital. There was no noise, only a profound, expensive silence. A receptionist who looked like a runway model sat behind a desk that seemed to be carved from a single piece of white quartz. She led Anna down a long, art-filled hallway to a pair of massive dark wood doors. "Miss Vance is ready for you." The office was an observatory at the top of the world. The panoramic, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 180-degree view that stretched from the Statue of Liberty to the bridges of the East River. The city was laid out below them like a blueprint. Elizabeth Vance sat behind a desk that was a vast, empty expanse of polished ebony, a queen on her throne. Today, she was fully armored in a navy blue power suit, her expression cool, focused, and analytical. "Anna, please sit," she said, gesturing to a leather armchair that was undoubtedly more valuable than all of Anna's possessions combined. "Since our conversation this morning, I've had my team compile a file. Anna Kowalski, age 24, born in Steubenville, Ohio, accepted to NYU on a partial academic scholarship, which you were forced to decline. Currently employed at the Daily Grind Diner, working 60 hours a week. Roughly 70% of your income is wired to your mother, Marianne Kowalski, to cover treatment for her advanced rheumatoid arthritis. Is that all correct?" Anna felt a cold chill. Her entire life, summarized in a few clinical bullet points. She could only nod. "Last night you demonstrated a level of compassion that is, frankly, rare," Elizabeth continued, her voice even. "But more importantly, you demonstrated a core of character that is virtually extinct in this city. You refused a substantial sum of money that you desperately needed, because your integrity was not for sale. People like you, Anna, are not a commodity. You are an asset class of one." She leaned forward slightly, her blue eyes pinning Anna in place. "I am not offering you a gift. I am making a strategic investment, the position of my executive assistant. It is not a 9-to-5 job, it will be your life. But it comes with a starting salary of $150,000. It comes with a corporate apartment in Midtown, effective immediately. It comes with a full, non-repayable scholarship to complete your degree at NYU. And it comes with my company's full medical plan, which will cover 100% of your mother's treatment, including relocation to the best specialists here in New York. Anna sat there, listening to a litany of miracles. It was too much to comprehend. A life raft had not been thrown to her. A luxury yacht had just been handed over. The tears that had threatened all morning finally came, spilling silently down her cheeks. They weren't tears of sadness or fear, but of a relief so profound it felt like a physical release. I don't know what to say, she choked out. For the first time, a real, unguarded smile touched Elizabeth Vance's lips, transforming her face. Don't say anything, she said softly. Just say yes. Elizabeth stood and extended her hand across the vast desk. Anna rose on shaky legs and took it. The handshake was firm, a contract sealed. Then Elizabeth gestured to the wall of glass. Go on. The view is the best perk of the job. Anna walked to the window and placed her hand on the cool glass. She looked down at the sprawling, infinite city. The streets that had once been a labyrinth of struggle and despair now looked like pathways of pure possibility. Her new life was waiting.